Tonight, we have a program with David Lesch. David is a professor of Middle Eastern Studies, Middle Eastern History at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. And David has been going to Syria for, I believe, 23 years?
What's 1989? 23 years, yes.
23 years.
Okay.
Has some experience in that country. But most interestingly, the reason I'm most excited to have him talk to us tonight, unlike a lot of people who have lots of opinions about Syria, David actually got to know Bashar Assad pretty well, having spent a lot of time talking to him, which is a pretty unique perspective for an American academic in particular. And David wrote a book in 2005 which held out great hope for the future of Syria under Bashar. If you recall, there was some sense that Bashar would be a reformer in Syria after his father died. We've now discovered that's not to be the case. And he's now written another book called The Fall of the House of Assad, which tries to fill us in. So we're going to talk a bit about that tonight. And my first question is going to be, David, quite simply, when did you first meet Assad and what were your impressions of him?
Well, I first met President Bashar in 2004. I wanted to interview him because he was the atypical Middle East dictator. He was a licensed ophthalmologist. He was not groomed to be president, and only was brought back into the grooming process in the political apparatus when his older brother, Basil, who was being groomed to succeed his father, died in a car accident in 1994. Bashar at the time was in London getting what the equivalent of an advanced degree in ophthalmology, and he was brought back and steadily raised in the state apparatus until he became president when his father died in 2000. So I thought that was a very interesting story, that he was different from the typical Middle East dictators that I studied throughout modern Middle East history. And so in 2002, I contacted a friend of mine who happened to be the Minister of Higher Education. And he was in academia. And when traveling to Syria for years, I met a lot of academics, as being an academic myself. And Bashar brought a lot of these people into government. And that was, I guess, either a good or a bad thing. I don't know about academics being in government, but many people saw that as a sign that, bringing academics, technocrats, that maybe he would take the country in a different direction. So I contacted this Minister of Higher Education, and he contacted Bashar. And 2 years, almost to the day later, the ambassador to Syrian ambassador to the United States at the time, Imad Mustafa, he called me up, and he was also a friend, and he also was an academic in the past. He was the dean of computer science at Damascus University prior to becoming ambassador. And he said, "David, it's on." And I'd plumb forgotten about this whole thing. And I said, "What's on?" And he said, "Well, the president wants to meet with you." And so I met with him in May and June of that year extensively, interviewed his wife and many other Syrian officials.
What was the first meeting like?
Well, after the pleasantries, and after I explained why I wanted to do this, I went, my first substantive sentence to him was, "Mr. President, you know I'm not an apologist for Syria. I'm writing this book on you, and I'm going to criticize you in this book." And he said, "That's fine. I know you will criticize me. I know that, because I'm not perfect, and I know that in the past that you've criticized my father's policies. But you were always fair and objective, from their point of view." And then I told him that, "Mr. President, one of the worst things that you ever did." And he goes, "What's that?" And I said, "You let it be known that you like Phil Collins music, the rock star from England." And he goes, he had a puzzled look in his face, and he was probably thinking, "Why do we let this guy in here? He's asking me these stupid questions." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because in the West, this information was disseminated, and it contributed to this profile of him being a modernizing, pro-Western reformer. He liked Western music. He was an ophthalmologist. He studied in London for 18 months. He's going to be completely different than his taciturn father." And I said, this created perhaps too high expectations in the West of exactly what you want to do and what you're able to do.
Where were your meetings held normally?
They were held in various places, usually in what's called the Rauda presidential building. It's a very modest building in the Malki district of Damascus. And, I mean, very modest. It's a typical kind of middle-class, you know, residential apartment building that was transformed into they call it a presidential palace. It's not at all. And that's where he mainly works. The street is blocked off. But we also met in what's called the People's Palace, which was built by his father, this grand structure on the top of this mountain overlooking Damascus. I mean, it's palace, then some. But he hardly ever goes there, and he only meets dignitaries there. And the only reason why I met him there one time is that he was meeting with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president. And I met with him just after that. And I think I can say this now, considering the current circumstances. But you know, I asked him. I said, "Well, Mr. President, what do you think of Ahmadinejad?" And he just rolled his eyes. He just said, "Oh my God," basically.
Really?
Yeah. And he said, "Thank God, Khamenei, Ayatollah Khamenei makes the decisions in
So he
Iran."
criticized Ahmadinejad in front of you?
Yeah. Yeah. I can say that now because I'm probably never going to see him again, unfortunately or unfortunately. But
so explain how that relationship then went on. You got to know him better and better?
yeah, I got to know him very well, and from the beginning, and this is one of the sad things, you know, I actually got to personally like the man. It's very difficult, as you know, when you establish a relationship with someone like that, and you want to get to know that person, but you try to remain objective and keep your distance. And sometimes that's tough. And I'm not a professional as you are, as have been, in doing that sort of thing. But even for professionals, I know it's sometimes difficult. And sometimes to maintain that access, you have to establish this personal relationship. And so that's a little difficult. And I tried to maintain that distance and objectivity. But we, I think, developed a comfort level to the point where, you know, I got to get snippets of him, the person. When you interview these figures like this, I mean, especially political figures, presidents, kings, queens, whatever, about 90% of what they tell you is scripted, will appear in the newspapers over the next week. It's just stuff I've heard. It goes in one ear and out the other. It's not really interesting at all. But it's that 10% or 15% of what he tells you that's really dynamite. And that's when, you know, the guard is down. And I think we developed enough of a relationship. And he was always very welcoming and gracious, almost self-deprecating in the beginning, which is something I saw change, you know, as time went on, unfortunately. To the point where he did let his guard down at times.
Did you meet the wife and kids?
I did. I didn't meet the kids. I met Asma Assad. Met her several times, interviewed her. And all of these interviews I had with them were like 2-3 hours apiece. And so it covered a wide range of topics. And she is a very cosmopolitan, very impressive person, classic English accent. Again, someone who people had high hopes in the beginning, because she was different. The first couple was different than in the past. And usually the Syrian president's wife, al-Assad's wife, stayed in the background. No one ever saw them. But she was out front. She was you know, a champion of women's rights and a champion of trying to create civil society organizations, although they were tied to the government and not really independent. Nothing much is independent
Profiled her
in Syria.
in the Prof magazine too, right?
Yeah, they profiled her just before the uprising, called her the Rose of the Desert or something like that, Desert Rose, which they were very embarrassed about when the uprising. And that's what one of the questions is, you know, where has that person gone? You know, in whom people had high hopes, just like Bashar al-Assad. Where did that person go? And that's one of the saddest things about that, because they really did, you know, they really did develop a level of popularity in the country that wasn't insignificant. Syria, it's difficult to gauge popularity because sometimes the people will come out in support of Bashar al-Assad and the government because they don't want to be seen as not supporting the government, because the mukhabarat, the security services, are all around. So it's really difficult to see how genuine and sincere this popularity is. But you know, having been in the country quite a bit and gone around all over the country and talked to all sorts of classes of people, I really did sense a genuine popularity. And for me personally, that's one of the saddest things